felt a great disturbance in the Force, as if millions of fanboys suddenly cried out in anger and were never silenced. I fear something terrible has happened. Okay, so here's something I didn't think I was going to talk about. So something very weird happened, and I ignored it initially, and then it got confirmed, like, no, this is for real, with independent verification from fairly reliable sources, and, yeah. So, a pretty dang detailed breakdown of what was Colin Trevorrow's plan for Star Wars Episode 9 basically got out. Exactly how, I don't know. This is an immediately curious artifact because regardless of what you think about Star Wars Episode 9, finding out what it was intended to be at an earlier point is just interesting. So, like, that's cool. Here's one thing. I am not going to go point for point through this thing. I am not going to give you the full breakdown. There are other folks who have done that. I will link to sources below if you want just all the plot points. I'm not going to assume that you do already know them. I will talk about each one that I wish to discuss. Just understand, don't come to me for the comprehensive list of everything. And now, the other thing to keep in mind before I talk about this is, this would have been the plan when Trevorrow was going to direct, which also means it was the plan when Carrie Fisher was still alive. So, while I'm sure there are plenty of people who are going to look at this and go, Abrams threw it out, the story as it was presented couldn't be done anyway, or at least huge swaths of it couldn't be done because Carrie Fisher died. And so you can't just assume this is the movie we would have had. This was the plan before the 1-2 punch of Carrie Fisher dying and then Trevorrow leaving the project. And again, the exact nature of that still seems iffy to me in terms of why exactly it happened. My assumption had always been that he didn't have a ton of time to rework the story that he had after Carrie Fisher had died, and he couldn't crack in that amount of time what he was going to do with it. So he either bailed or they asked him to leave, or possibly both. I know there are things that have been said and this and that, but like that was always kind of the assumption that I went with. This plot, honestly, while Carrie Fisher is important in it, and obviously they couldn't have still done this plan with her parts intact because they couldn't shoot new stuff with her, she's not as prominent as I would have expected, at least not in the breakdown as seen. And some of the stuff, like the major fundamental things are not the same. So here's the first thing that this basically confirms. That the making of Rise of Skywalker was not the result of 2 films worth of buildup. It was the result of a fairly tightly scheduled massive upheaval and rewrite. So the big things to bring up here, the 2 big things to bring up, spoilers for Rise of Skywalker, I guess. Warning. I don't know if I still need to be given that. But first, Rey remains nobody in this plot outline, and Palpatine doesn't come back. Which means that Rey Palpatine definitively, and we've kind of had this indication up to this point, but definitively was not planned and was not some grand master scheme. And the Emperor coming back, things were not all building to that. Now, that does not need to inherently undermine the value of Rise of Skywalker. If you took enjoyment from it, the fact that it wasn't planned to be, for that film to always be those things, doesn't mean the film loses value. I still enjoyed the movie for the most part. I didn't enjoy the Palpatine thing, and I didn't like that Rey was his granddaughter. So funnily enough, those things specifically I actually didn't like. But, you know, lots of people, I suspect, and I have been avoiding the discourse that I'm sure is swirling around all this, because I don't want to set off a migraine. But I don't doubt that there are plenty of people who are going, see, it was never supposed to be that, therefore Rise of Skywalker is terrible. Well, no, those are completely unrelated things. If the specific issues that you have with Rise of Skywalker kind of get explained by the fact that, well, this wasn't planned, which for me is kind of the case with some of the issues I have with that film, that's one thing. But to simply now go, the movie is garbage and has no value because it wasn't part of a plan. Like, do you know how late into the game Marvel didn't have a plan? And how much they continue to make up as they go? They're just a lot better at stitching it together than Star Wars has been. So, like, that in and of itself doesn't remove value from Rise of Skywalker. And it's funny, I read a write-up on this that presents it like Colin Trevorrow's planned film was awesome, and we were robbed of it. And I went through this plot summary and went, okay, some of this stuff is a decent idea. Some of it builds more directly off The Last Jedi. So if you like The Last Jedi more than I did, it probably would have appealed to you. But there's other stuff that I'm like, no, that's dumb. I'm not sure it's as dumb as Palpatine coming back, but it ain't good. So I also feel like people who don't like Rise of Skywalker are going to oversell this thing. Oh, for God's sake, if this begins a petition of it couldn't even be released, the Trevorrow cut, because the script wasn't shot. But if we start seeing a petition for shoot the Trevorrow cut, I'm gonna throw something. Probably something soft, because I don't want to break stuff. But, you know, the frustration. Anyways, so aside from the fact that Rey remains nobody and Palpatine doesn't come back, sort of. He's not back from the dead, or whatever the hell he actually was in Rise of Skywalker. He does make an appearance in this plot. Oh, the working title is Duel of the Fates. So let's call it that going forward. He was going to appear, but as part of a holocron, as a message, not actually still being alive. Which, if they were gonna shoehorn him in there, I would much rather they had done that. So points for that there. As far as the First Order, that actually gets a little bit detached. It actually, in many ways, this plot pulls a Return of the Jedi, which is to say, the Force users, the people who wear lightsabers, they have their plot. And then the Rebellion and the Empire in Return of the Jedi, First Order in this case, have their plot, and rarely the twain shall meet. So that seems to be much more how it was constructed, with Rey and Kylo Ren being built up. And in this thing, apparently Hux is leading the First Order, because at the end of Last Jedi, as far as they were concerned, Kylo Ren went off, did his own thing. But the First Order still is there. Somebody's got to run it. He's running it. I think that would have... Well, depending on execution, that might have taken some people off because nobody likes Hux, except for me. I think he's great. He's a terrible person. I think he's a great character, honest to God. But the whole thing that was going to be dealt with the First Order was that they basically did a communications blackout across the galaxy. So now the planets can't communicate with each other, in the interest of not letting the story of what Luke Skywalker did in standing up to the First Order, in the tail end of The Last Jedi. They don't want that story to spread and inspire hope and rebellion and resistance. So that's that. And so the Resistance's main thrust and the main thing that they're after is finding a way to get a message out through this communications blackout to then rally the galaxy to pull together. Which is, while the whole communications blackout thing is new, is not vastly dissimilar from what ended up being pulled in Rise of the Jedi effectively. Now, granted, it was Palpatine and his bajillion Star Destroyers with Death Star lasers, which is like that's dumb, but it's kind of fun dumb. But anyways, but the way that gets taken on is Lando basically manages to rally the entire rest of the galaxy. So there's still that idea of they need to rally everybody else or they're doomed. That appears in both stories. So there's that. With Kylo Ren, so what they did with him, and they dropped the redemption for Ben, which, here's what I'm going to say. I'm slightly iffy on, because his trajectory and his character and his arc and his redemption and his connection with Rey was actually, I thought, a lot of the best stuff in Rise of Skywalker. So while I'm not going to say that Duel of the Fates would have done it worse, I'm much less confident in replacing the stuff that I really liked, because the Duel of the Fates would have had to have done it extremely well for me to enjoy. They fail to bring him back to the light side and he dies, and make me enjoy that as much as I enjoyed his redemption and coming back to the light side in Rise of Skywalker. It would be very hard for them to do that. But what he does, and this is where the Emperor comes into play in this thing, he finds a holocron, and the Emperor directs him to... Hang on, I gotta look up the name of this guy. So, the Emperor's hologram directs Kylo Ren to Palpatine's old master, Tor Valum, 7,000-year-old Sith, and Kylo Ren goes to him for training. Oh, and apparently when he goes to Azala Mustafar, which was Vader's home base, it's the lava place. So Kylo Ren goes there to try and find this holocron and get this message, and Luke's Force Ghost is following him and taunting him the whole way. Which, I don't know how I feel about that. It's interesting. I'll give it that. But then Kylo Ren goes and trains with this guy. Now, I've got a couple problems with this. First of all, I have no doubt that this guy is in the lore somewhere and expanded blah, blah, blah. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I don't care. I shouldn't have to do homework to know who these people are. In the films, this guy's never been mentioned. Like, the only Sith to predate Palpatine that has ever been name-checked was Darth Plagueis. And this is not that. This is something else. Now, that said, I will say that what notes are in there about how this thing was intended to be designed was kind of cool. Like, the word Lovecraftian got bandied about, and this sort of very otherworldly being that was sort of really channels him and embodies the dark side of the Force. I'm kind of curious to have seen what that would have looked like. That would have been cool. But there's something about, like, basically this massive dark side force that is so powerful that it trained the guy who, up to this point, we thought was the end-all, be-all of Sith power. And we've, A, never heard of him before, and B, he's never taken an active role in any of this. There may be an explanation, but my immediate question is, why don't you take action if you care about the light side, dark side thing? And if you don't care, why are you training anybody? I don't know. It brings up immediate questions, which the new trilogy has been very bad at answering. The questions that tend to be its own plots tend to bring up. And I keep saying that some things you can gloss over. Some things I'm not sure you can. And that would be kind of a big question. A little bit of a big plot hole if they were to do that. But that's apparently the whole thing for Kylo Ren. So what Leia's part in this whole thing was going to be, she was apparently going to do two things. She was going to rally the Armada to come and take on the First Order. So that, she was going to be the General Leia. Makes sense. General Organa, you listen to her and you do what she says. And the other thing was that she did not believe that Ben could be saved, whereas Rey did. Which, if properly executed, the idea that Rey thought he could be redeemed, but realized at the end he can't and he dies, that can pay off well. Hard needle to thread, but it could work. Like, in many ways, giving Kylo Ren some kind of redemptive arc is the easier emotional weight to bring to everything. Having the hope die is a harder thing to do well. I mean, you just compare Revenge of the Sith to Return of the Jedi. And it's not just about one being an up or one being a downer. One is just better executed than the other. Because it's easier. Triumph is not the easiest thing in the world to do extremely well, but Triumph is a little bit easier to give audiences a satisfying thing than everything falls apart. And I mean, it wouldn't be like, I suppose it would depend on whether or not they like really go all in. I'm like, he's bad and irredeemable, and where they go with that. So, or would have gone with that, rather. There was some other stuff about the way that the Resistance was going to get the message out. There was some sort of beacon in the old Jedi Temple, which is underneath Coruscant, which is controlled by the First Order. So that whole thing, not vastly dissimilar to all the sort of sneaking around the First Order that was actually in Rise of the Skywalker. There it was about, finding these little map things. So, like, locations were different and things, but, like, general tone, not a million miles off as far as that subplot goes. Also, doesn't look like Rose was going to be effectively written out in this. So there's that. She was actually going to be, part of a group that had a mission. But overall, I look at this and go, I see some of the things here that I'm not sure are great ideas, but are better than the ones that were done in Rise of Skywalker. And then there are other things that I see that I'm like, there are actually elements of Rise of Skywalker that I really like, and I worry that this doing something else wouldn't have done the other thing as good as the good stuff in Rise of Skywalker. Again, specifically talking about Rey and Ben, and Rey, Finn, and Poe, their group dynamic, collectively. Because again, as planned, this Duel of the Fates would have split the group again. I'm really annoyed by that, actually. They really didn't seem to understand how good these three actors had chemistry together. But it's kind of an interesting thing to find out and to think about and to speculate. As long as people don't start to get stupid about it, which I'm sure they will and already have. But yeah, either based off what you've read or what you've just heard me ramble, what do you think about this theoretical alternate episode 9 that was the original plan? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. You can also support me immensely by going to my Patreon. There are many, many tiers, including as little as $1 a month, and it is a huge help. But even if you can't spare me the change, you can you can subscribe, you can share this around, all of which are wonderfully helpful. Plus, there's links to other stuff below. I've got an Instagram for Council of Geeks now. There isn't much on it, but it exists. So, there's that. There's other stuff besides. Click on things, or, don't. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I can't Jedi mind trick you to do my bidding, much as I might wish it. I would so spam that ability. But, yeah, at the end of the day, you're the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. You will like, share, and subscribe. Oh my friggin' god. Okay, so I completely missed talking about a couple of things. So, alright, apparently they added in a thing, or they would have added in a thing where Yeah, I said Rey was still nobody and her parents were nobody, but for no particular reason, it's revealed that Kylo Ren killed them. That's stupid and completely unnecessary. Like, what the heck does that gain? And they were gonna have it end with Rey beginning to train the next generation of Force users, including Broom Kid from the end of the previous movie. And that's a nice tie-in with that, because otherwise, the moment that The Last Jedi ended on, honestly, it kind of hangs there like an appendix as it stands right now. So yeah, I thought to add this a day later, i.e. the day before this goes up, i.e. I gotta now re-edit the crap out of this thing. So yeah. Glad I caught it at least.